Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Hollywood Memories. I'm Dan Roberts, the publisher of The Vegas Voice, and my great task is to interview my favorite columnist, the other woman in my life, and that is Miss Beverly.
Thank you, Dan.
Let me just start out, if you don't mind, Beverly, by thanking our sponsor, Carnegie Heights.
Absolutely.
They have just been fantastic, and we are so grateful to them. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carnegie. It's such a wonderful place, and we're so happy to be associated with you.
You know what? Let's do something a little bit different this time, going back in time, because there was a movie that you did way back in 1953.
Way back.
And that is considered one of the greatest movies and classics and westerns of all time, and that is the movie Shane.
Shane. Yeah, of course, I had no idea at the time, you know, all these years later, that it would be considered one of the all-time classics. I was, I guess, 8 or 9 or something.
Thank
you.
Young.
Yeah, and we filmed it. Most of it was filmed in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
And that must have been very different. Wait, let's just, before we go into that, tell us a little bit about the cast, because I went through the listing of all the people that were in it, and they were just fantastic celebrities, movie stars.
Yeah, exactly. And Alan Ladd was the main character, right. And Jean Arthur. Of course, at the time, and I've said this before, I was so young, I had no idea who they were. And it was directed by George Stevens, who's another very iconic, well-known director. And again, I had no idea I was being directed by George Stevens. And it wasn't until I became an adult, of course, that I realized how fortunate I was that I could even say that I'd been directed by George Stevens.
Again, going over the Alan Ladd, Jean Arthur, Van Heflin, Jack Palance, Ben Johnson, and Brandon
DeWilde.
DeWilde, I'm sorry,
yeah.
DeWilde.
He's the one that had the famous line, "Shane, come back."
Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, he died at a young age, and which was tragic because he was a wonderful actor. He was what would be considered kind of a little bratty boy. He used to love to pull my pigtails because we were at that age where boys and girls don't like each other that much. So he would chase me around the set and
you never smacked him or anything like that?
No, but I mean, he was adorable, and he was a fabulous actor, and I think he probably would have gone on to be quite famous.
Talk a little bit about the movie. What was the plot, very quickly?
I can't even remember. It's been so long. I played one of the Lewis children. I was the daughter of Edgar Buchanan, who was a wonderful, wonderful man. And it's been years since I've even seen Shane, but I know it's iconic, and I feel so grateful.
And again, he played one of those quiet, tough guy people, but you had an incident where he really wasn't that tough, was he?
Well, it's kind of an embarrassing incident, but he took it all in stride. As I said, we filmed it in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We did a few scenes on the Paramount lot, but the majority of it was done there. And so on this one weekend when we had the day off, the crew, most of the crew and some of the cast went over to go on the chairlift. And, they don't have seat belts or anything. And you go up this huge mountain. So I sat there, and I think we have a picture of that.
We do.
Yeah.
We're going to put it on the screen.
So it was just really a thrill for me. So we get up to the top of the mountain. Well, Alan Ladd was in the chairlift behind me.
By himself.
Yes. And when he got up at the top of the mountain, he refused to go back down. He was petrified.
Petrified?
Yes, and so they had to actually get a helicopter for him, and because he was afraid to go down. So the next day on the set, it was mortifying for me because I was so young and I was embarrassed. But the crew, because Alan Ladd was a great guy, they liked to tease him, and so they were ribbing him about the fact that here he's this big, brave, Western star, and he was afraid to go down the chairlift. So they said to him in front of me, little Beverly had no problem going down. Well, I was so embarrassed because I thought he would be mad at me or say something. And I remember that, oh no, why did they tell him that? But he took it all in stride, and he laughed too because they were just teasing him.
And did you tease him too? Did you
No.
say, hey, Alan, grow up?
Yeah, right.
I mean, anything along those lines?
You always made me laugh, Dan, because I've never, as a child, I had never spoken to adults by their first name.
Oh, Mr. Ladd,
yeah, but no.
You didn't do that either.
No, I didn't say anything. I was just embarrassed that they brought me into it by saying that little Beverly didn't have any problem, but you did, you know, and making fun of him.
Yeah.
But, you know, he knew that they were just ribbing him and teasing. And
so
he laughed. Yeah, so he laughed too. And then I felt a little better because he gave me a hug after that.
So, yeah, he didn't get you fired or anything?
No, he gave me a hug afterward, and that was reassuring because I was embarrassed that happened.
You know, and you mentioned before, and you mentioned again and again, that you were with all these great stars, but you didn't realize who they were or anything along those lines.
Well, when you're that age, you don't have the same, you know, concept of who they are or that they're famous. And, you know, at the risk of being redundant, I always say it took me becoming an adult, or at least, you know, a late teenager, to realize how fortunate I was to have worked with so many big names, because I didn't know who they were. They were just nice people that I was working with.
And maybe one nice person who didn't look that nice was Jack Palance, who
yes.
was in it. And as a kid, I remember watching his movies.
He was a bit menacing
to look at. He was a bad guy. He used to scare the hell out of me.
I know.
And how did you deal with it?
Well, he was a little frightening to us, and we were a little bit, you know, he was intimidating, but he was so nice. And he just had that kind of a look about him that was, you know, kind of menacing.
No, it was frightening. It wasn't menacing.
Okay, it was a little frightening. But he was so nice to all of us, and so we saw that he was just a nice man. But when we first saw him, yeah, all of us, the ones we played the Lewis children, there were a group of girls. Now, I was the only one that was cast in California, and the other girls, they cast in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, because we didn't even really have dialogue. But I had worked at Paramount a couple of times by then with Bing Crosby and Here Comes the Groom and The Greatest Show on Earth. So they knew me. So the casting person just hired me to be one of the Lewis children. And then they cast the others when we got there. And so at the time, they sent us by train. So I went with my mother and me.
Yeah, that was my question. You didn't go by yourself.
Oh, no. You have to have a guardian or a parent with you, as well as a welfare worker that is hired by the studio, and they come from the Los Angeles Board of Education, and they're certified school teacher, and you have to have 3 hours of schooling on the set and all of that.
But it must have been a thrill going from L.A. to...
It was very exciting, yeah, being on a train. And at the time, I had all these dolls, and as a little girl, that was my thing. I had all these dolls, and they all had names, and I talked to them like they were real. Yeah. And so my mother said I couldn't take all of them with me. And so I didn't want to hurt any of their feelings. So it was so crazy. I don't know why I'm telling the story. But anyway, so I wrote all their names down, all of my dolls. But I never called them my dolls. I called them my babies. And put them in a box. And then I reached in and drew the names out because she said I could take 3 of them with me. And I didn't want to, why am I telling this story? This is embarrassing. But this is what happened. So I had one boy doll, and I named him Georgie because that was my brother's name, and I adored my older brother, Georgie. And so, but I didn't draw that name, so I took 3 others. So during the course of the shooting, I got quite ill, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. It turned out it was just a very severe flu, but they put me in the hospital right away and all that. And so there's a scene that's supposed to be me, but they had a stand-in and just shoved me from the back because they didn't want to send me all the way back to LA and bring me back again. And so I was a daddy's girl. So when I talked to my daddy, I told him that I would feel a whole lot better if I could have one more of my babies with me. And so this time I didn't draw a name because Georgie was my only boy doll. And so I said if he would send me Georgie, I'd probably feel a whole lot better. I was kind of spoiled, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it also sounds like one of the greatest movies ever made. Your remembrance is, well, I got sick and I had to get my dolls.
I know. Well, see, I didn't know that I was part of such an iconic movie until years later. And I know a lot of people who are Western fans, they consider that in their top 5.
Oh, positively. Yeah, it's still a great movie. You watch it now. But you know what? Another thing that I got a kick out of is talking about the age differences. Again, this was made in 1953. 2 bit characters went on TV and became famous in
Yes.
the 60s or so, and that was the guy who played your father.
Right,
That was,
Edgar Buchanan, who was the nicest man in the world.
and then there was Nancy Culp, which, I mean, I saw her immediately and I said, oh, that's from the Beverly
I know.
Hillbillies. That was Miss
Who would have
Hathaway.
thought, right?
Who would
Yeah.
think that they would go on to
Yeah.
something like that? So, I mean, it's remarkable with all the kidding I do that the career that you had.
Thank you.
And it just shows you how lucky I am that you
Aw.
put up with me and everything. So I want to thank you. We're going to have
you.
a lot more. We have some other interesting ideas coming ahead. And again, I want to thank Carnegie Heights for
Thank
sponsoring us and taking care of us.
Absolutely.
So until we meet again, I'm Dan Roberts, and you are,
Beverly Washburn, thank you.
and we will see you again next time.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.